Hello and good afternoon. A very warm welcome to this EPC discussion entitled Where is Russia's Invasion of Ukraine Headed in 2024? My name is Amanda Paul. I'm a senior policy analyst at the EPC, where I lead our work related to Ukraine. I have the big honor of moderating this discussion today, and I'm joined by two outstanding experts. First of all, Andriy Zagorodnyuk, chairman of the Center for Defense Strategies and former Minister of Defense of Ukraine, and Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, former commanding general of the US Army Europe, and also NATO senior mentor for logistics and a senior advisor. He has other titles, they both do, and I'm sure that they're very well known to all of the audience. Now, I'm going to start by asking our two guests a number of questions before taking questions from the audience. But please do start putting your questions now, either by writing them in the Q&A box or by clicking on the hand icon. Everybody's very well familiar with this format now, so I don't think this will be an issue. I want to start with you, Andriy, if I may, and welcome again to this session. How do you see the situation on the battlefield, and what's your prediction for 2024 and beyond? Many experts and others have said that Ukraine will only be able to carry out a land defensive operations. Would you agree with that? And secondly, how do you see the failure of Ukraine's allies to deliver sufficient weapons in 2023 and the current sort of stalemate with US and EU aid? How is this going to impact the situation on the ground?
Thank you, Amanda, and good afternoon, everyone. Ben, great to see you. It's good to see you again. And basically, the second question answers the first. So we essentially not in an area of predictions, because we're in an area where we shape the security environment right now, and the security environment is shaped by everybody, including all of us here, because our politicians everywhere in the democratic community, they sometimes they'll listen to the analytical community, sometimes they'll listen to the active citizens, sometimes they'll listen to the experts and ex-military and so on. Because there's a lot of things which happened in the previous 2 years were actually shaped by the public advocacy and expert advocacy. I have to say that US government didn't want to supply tactical aviation, didn't want to supply tanks, didn't want to supply HIMARSs and many other things, until there's been a serious advocacy campaigns from all kinds of from all over the world, from Ukraine, from United States, from Europe, from United Kingdom, and so on, which actually created the reality where some governments decided finally that they need to ship the certain weapons, and without that, we wouldn't be even in the position where we are here today. So I honestly, I would avoid trying to predict the future, because it depends on a whole many actions and a whole many events which we are in a position to create or to make happen. So, for example, if Ukraine receives enough weapons, Ukraine absolutely clearly can, from active defense, to move to a counteroffensive. And it will have that opportunity, and it's very clear what is required. It's still the war about the long-range firepower. Of course, during the 2023, we had a massive change in the doctrines of war because of the role of the unmanned aerial vehicles, particularly with the first-person view. So they changed the whole, situation dramatically. So yet today we're also talking about the industrial collaboration, because no country has those items in stock in the required quantities. So we need to make them, and for that we need to establish a very unique industrial collaboration structures. But apart from that, and apart from some similar items like that, we're still talking about quite conventional and quite standard weapons which are in abundance in the Western countries, and so it's not a matter of the future prediction. It's not a matter of luck. It's a matter of choice. It's a matter of political choice, and it's not military choice, because we keep in touch with our military colleagues on a sort of daily basis, and we know where they stand, we know what their position is, and so on. So it's a matter of political choice, particularly high-level politicians, whether Ukraine wins or whether Russia is still pursuing its invasion. Of course, even with the lack of weapons, Ukraine is not going to surrender. Just so we close this issue from the very beginning, Ukraine will fight with whatever we have. Our Minister of Foreign Affairs recently said that we'll fight with shovels if we need it, and that's correct. So Ukraine, because there's nothing worse than Russian occupation. So yeah, but the question is that Russia still can progress somehow. I mean, they're not going to progress like invading the whole Ukraine, but they can certainly still progress in the front line if we don't procure the proper weapons. So that's how to answer your question. Thank you.
But maybe just a quick follow-up. I mean, if we have this abundance of weapons around Europe and elsewhere, I mean, why are they not being delivered to Ukraine now? I mean, because in Europe, we keep hearing there aren't sufficient weapons, we don't have weapons. Is it because of this issue of being too timid? Is there still this issue out there about escalation? Because I mean, I thought this had sort of gone off the radar. I mean, why is this? I mean, I understand on the issue of ammunition, there's this huge shortage, but on other stuff, I mean, why is it not being shipped to Ukraine as we sit here?
I'll probably let Ben reply about continental Europe, because he's based in continental Europe and he knows better than anyone about the continental Europe. On the United States, I can just suggest you or anyone else Google the word like Sierra Army Base, Sierra Army Depot, and you will see the vehicles and tanks and armored vehicles standing like till the horizon, and they're all in a battlefield ready condition, supposed to be at least. And we can show another basis like which our military friends sharing with us, where we see like thousands of armored vehicles, thousands of armored personnel carriers, and all kinds of other stuff. So it's not the question of yes, indeed, some of the items. There are like bottlenecks. For example, production of the artillery battles is still a bottleneck. However, there's been a debottlenecking activities done, including by Ukraine during the 2023. So it's not that bottleneck which it used to be back in a year ago. But in most of the cases, it all depends on the political level decisions. So basically, starting from ministries of defense and high up. And then the questions, yes, some people think about the escalations, which are honestly already at this point of time doesn't make much sense, because Russia is trying to escalate as much as it can. And whatever they don't do is they don't do because of the even worse repercussions than they have right now. So it's not about like non-supplying weapons. Actually, the self-deterrence is more escalatory than the supplying of weapons, because the self-deterrence show Russia that they have a hope, that they have a chance, that they have a possibility to win, and they manipulate with those escalation threats with the Western countries, particularly with the United States and some other countries in continental Europe, in order to basically shape their own gameplay of the war, where they can be stronger. So from escalation perspective, that's obviously a problem. We saw some recent decisions in continental Europe and Germany about the supplying of weapons. So I will let Ben to continue if that's okay, because it's not.
No, absolutely, and I'll come back to the US in a moment, but I want to give Ben a chance to respond to that, and also to get his insights on where he thinks we are on the battlefield as well. So I'll give you the floor, Ben.
Muted.
You would think after all these years, I still made that mistake. Our defense industries are not charities. I mean, they have thousands of employees. They have very complex, competitive supply chains. And so the improvement of ammunition production, for example, or the refurbishment of things, this has to be an expression of political will to put the money into doing it. And so in the US, we did quadruple artillery production inside of 1 year. Of course, what was quadrupled was already a very small amount, because they were making just enough that we need for our own training every year. So it's possible to increase production, but you have to put money on it. This is not a voluntary sort of thing for any business in any country. I think the failure of the United States to deliver ATACMS, for example, or how slow we've been in delivering F-16s, the decision making is because of a failure of political will by the administration to commit to Ukraine actually winning. If they made the commitment to win, then there'd be no more of this excuses about why we can't provide ATACMS and all of these things. And that's very frustrating. And here in Germany, yesterday, the Bundestag voted not to provide Taurus. And I really had felt like there was progress being made. The former Bundespräsident Gauck had said that Germany should provide this. Obviously, Friedrich Merz, the head of the opposition, CDU, was calling for it. But at the end of the day, not enough German political figures have the political will to deliver a weapon that would be very, very helpful. There is no one weapon, obviously, that changes everything, but giving Ukrainians a better long-range precision strike capability would neutralize the only real advantage the Russians have, which is mass, because long-range precision weapons would be used to destroy Russian headquarters, Russian artillery, Russian logistics. Every square meter of Russian-occupied Ukraine is within range of an ATACMS or Taurus. And so if these were provided, there would be no safe place for any Russian drone launch, artillery, logistics, anything inside Crimea or other parts of Russian-occupied Ukraine. Now, one last point I'd want to make, Amanda, is that there is this narrative out there somehow that, Russia's winning, that Ukraine cannot possibly win, that they need to go ahead and negotiate. And I would say this is an absolute false narrative, not based on any facts. After 10 years, this war started 10 years ago, and after 10 years, with every advantage, Russia still only controls about 18% of Ukraine. They have lost over 350,000 soldiers killed and wounded. The great Russian Air Force has failed to achieve air superiority, and they have not been able to destroy a single train or convoy bringing equipment and ammunition from Poland into Ukraine. So they have failed on job one and job two for any Air Force. The Great Black Sea Fleet, which has a really cool name, but is not really very good, is having to withdraw from Sevastopol, and Ukraine doesn't even have a navy. But Ukraine has been able to use asymmetric means to force the Russian Navy to have to begin pulling back from Sevastopol to Novorossiysk. And then finally, on top of the Russian logistics system already being in tatters and their defense industry being in tatters, we are seeing the effects of, I think, a very skillfully planned and executed, think of it as a net-centric strategic guerrilla campaign run by General Budanov and the HUR. They're doing a lot of things. Of course, these are not going to be headlines, except when there's a big explosion somewhere or a train is derailed. These kinds of activities that are happening throughout the depth of Russia and Russian-occupied territory is an important part of Ukraine's efforts as well. And I think General Budanov is getting a lot done.
But Ben, do you think there's still a sense from some parts of Europe, or maybe a lack of understanding, that this war is actually Europe's war? There still seems to be a sort of sense that many people still view it as, a Ukrainian war, that it hasn't really been taken on board. This is also Europe's war. I personally find it mind-boggling that the German chancellor made these sorts of decisions are being taken, while at the same time, I think last week he was saying Europe needs to supply Ukraine with more arms. The two things don't exactly go together.
No, they don't. On the positive side, more and more European leaders are talking about this in terms of this being Europe's war, that Europe needs to help. It's to the benefit of Europe and to the United States, by the way, that Ukraine is successful. President Macron was very clear the other day with this message and the decision to deliver Scout cruise missiles, for example. Prime Minister Sunak from UK recently taking steps to cement and increase UK's support and relationship with Ukraine. Obviously, all of the Eastern European countries that have been under the Russian influence or have lived next to Russia, they're not confused about what's at stake here. Germany is the biggest disappointment here where I live. I really had felt like it was moving in a different direction, but this vote in the Bundestag yesterday is a absolute total political failure.
Okay, thank you, Ben. I'm going to come back to you, Andriy, because Ben mentioned about Ukraine's operations in the Black Sea, which have been extremely successful. I mean, a lot of attention has been placed on the land situation, like on the land, but not so much on the counteroffensive in the Black Sea region. Are we likely to see an ongoing push from Ukraine in the Black Sea? I mean, on the Crimean Peninsula, in the Black Sea itself? I mean, Ukraine was able to create even the humanitarian corridors for shipping grain. Are we going to see a continuation of a strong focus on the Black Sea region? And what more can the allies do to actually support Ukraine here?
Ben, I have same situations. You would think that. Anyway, yeah. So Black Sea obviously doesn't get a close even enough attention as the ground counteroffensive, and for the wrong reasons, because it has massive geopolitical consequences. I mean, if we remember what happened is that there was a grain deal originally brokered by Turkey with the support of international community, UN, and so on. And after that, Russia just exited from that grain deal right before the harvest season, so that it hurts Ukraine mostly commercially and from a business perspective and economy perspective. And after that, they try to mitigate this, they try to negotiate that, and Russia just said no, because you cannot enforce it. So basically, we're just walking away. And Ukraine was supposed, and then Ukraine was on its own, and everybody was like, okay, so it's just not working. Sorry. And nobody could do anything. And NATO obviously was just kind of a delivering the concerns and so on. And then Ukraine started to rebuild it by itself by basically denying Russia a presence in the Black Sea. And so that's how the occupation of the Black Sea was amplified. However, of course, it started from the day one of the general like a full-scale war. But yeah, and then Ukraine now is just recently announced that it is shipping the pretty much close to the pre-war volumes of the grain. So that's huge. That's huge, and particularly since Ukraine didn't have its own fleet. It's only one ship was sunk. Well, it was under repair at that time, but nevertheless. And it was sunk by Ukrainian Navy to not to give it to the enemy because it was in Mykolaiv in the shipyard. So the thing is that there's lots of people who did not believe in any success in the Black Sea now suddenly saying, yeah, it's a completely different situation. So the first person who actually said it publicly was high level was a Minister of Armed Forces of the UK, who was in a Warsaw Security Conference, who said that Russia suffered a functional defeat in a Black Sea. What we need to learn from this is that, first of all these predictions that Ukraine cannot win are completely futile, because nobody believed, except for Ben and a few other experts, that Ukraine is going to win in the Black Sea. And now everybody's taking it for granted, like nothing major happened. Well, it's a huge deal happened, and these people who are currently saying that Ukraine cannot win on the ground should take that as a case. So the thing is that, of course, we need to the sea denial and basically the the command of the seas is something, is a process. It's not a status. So it needs to be supported all the time. So it needs weapons. It needs a continuous presence of Ukraine in waters. It needs drones. It needs all these missiles and so on, because that only denial, basically deterrence by denial, is the only thing which keeps Russia away from the grain corridor. That's the only thing. There's nothing else. There's absolutely nothing else. So anything else except for force is not working with Russia. That's basically also a message to all these guys who are saying that Ukraine needs to negotiate and Ukraine needs to concede and so on and so on. By the way, to those people, I strongly suggest to read yesterday's post of Medvedev in a Telegram, which says that Ukraine has to disappear regardless of whatever. I mean, of any other circumstances. So he's just transmitting the Kremlin position. So it's not like his idea. It's overall Kremlin's position. Same thing is, so essentially it's an existential threat, and the deterrence by denial, that's the only thing which works. So we need to enhance the capabilities. That's the only way. We need to enhance drones capabilities. We need to enhance small fleet capabilities. We need to enhance special operation forces, because they play a huge role in this, and also of course the missiles. So that's it. That's what we need to do. We just need to keep steady that course and not deviate to any fantasy off-ramps like negotiations. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, even President Putin yesterday is on the record as saying they're not remotely interested in negotiations, that the Russians are going to keep going.
Yeah.
So talking about negotiations is just pointless. But coming back to you, Ben, because you have done a lot of analysis on the Black Sea. I mean, for years actually. You always say that the destruction of the Kerch bridge would be a game changer. Do you still hold by this? And is this feasible?
Well, it certainly is absolutely feasible, and the general staff, I would expect, will pick the time and the methods, when they're ready, because it will require a lot. This is not a simple, something that you do with just one ATACMS or Storm Shadow or something like that. That's an enormous task. But it matters because the key, in my view, for liberating Crimea, the decisive terrain of this war, is to isolate it and make it untenable for Russian forces. So to isolate it means obviously destroying the bridge, and also being able to disrupt the so-called land bridge that runs from Rostov along Azov coast through Mariupol and Melitopol and down into Crimea. So isolating the Crimean Peninsula by cutting those two land approaches, the bridge and the land. But making it untenable means with precision strike or special forces or partisan attacks, so that the Navy, the Air Force, drone launches, logistics hub at Zhankoy, for example, all of these places should be hit repeatedly so that they have to do what's happening with the Black Sea Fleet. I mean, the Black Sea Fleet, that the Ukrainians have proved the concept with just 3 Storm Shadow or Scout cruise missiles. The 2 that hit the headquarters, and then 1 that hit the dry dock maintenance facility there. That the commander of the Black Sea Fleet says, we have to leave. We can't sit here. They're so vulnerable. And so that's why you're seeing part of the Black Sea Fleet having to reposition to Novorossiysk, which is already a full, busy seaport, but does not have the same level of military maintenance and sustainment capabilities. So this will disrupt the ability of the Black Sea Fleet to keep launching missiles at civilian targets. I have to say also, it's important that our ally Turkey, as frustrating as they are, the fact is, under their authority of the Montreux Convention, they do not allow more Russian ships to come into the Black Sea. This is not inconsequential. This is a big help that Russia cannot bring in more warships from outside the Black Sea other than the smaller vessels that they can move from Caspian Sea through the Volga, Don, down into Azov.
But how about these minesweeper vessels that the UK wanted to give to Ukraine, and Turkey stopped them from going through? Is that also because of the terms of the Montreal Convention? In my reading, it would be, but some people say no, it's not, and Turkey was just being difficult.
Well, whether or not they're being difficult is irrelevant. That is their authority, and as long as they keep Russian ships out, that's the most important thing. And I think that if Turkey, Romania, and Bulgaria follow through on their recent announcements to provide mine clearing capability in the Western Black Sea, then I think that will be very beneficial as well. The significant thing of this is that the Great Black Sea Fleet is not able. It's not like they made a decision, okay, we'll let the grain go through. They can't stop it. They don't want to get anywhere close where they don't want to get anywhere close to where a Ukrainian anti-ship missile, a Neptune, for example, can reach out and hit them. And so they're showing that they're willing to keep launching very expensive precision weapons against Ukrainian apartment buildings and shopping centers and medical centers, civilian targets, as their priority. So I think a combination of Ukraine's efforts, as well as if these three allies in the Black Sea will use their own mine clearance capabilities, that this will be able to keep the grain going from Ukraine.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, this is a great changing operation, because I mean Russia has put hundreds of thousands of landmines or sea mines, whatever you call them, into the Black Sea. So this is a positive development. But I just want to stay with you and move back to the situation in the United States, because I mean the US has been crucial in terms of delivering military aid, but we know there's been no assistance since the 1st of October, and everything is blocked. Ukraine's military aid has become attached to it's become attached to the border situation around with Mexico, and it's also blocked the aid for Israel and for Indo-Pacific. Do you feel confident that eventually this aid will get through? And how long would you assess it's going to take? Are we talking about a few more weeks or potentially longer?
Well, I have to say I'm embarrassed and angry that the U.S. is failing to think and act strategically. This is in our interest that Ukraine is successful. American prosperity and security depends on European prosperity and security. And here we are allowing a domestic political issue to dominate our strategic thinking, or to overtake our strategic thinking. So Republican House of Representatives, a small number of people are more interested in doing what former President Trump says and candidate Trump, rather than thinking strategically about what's best for our country. And so we're basically handicapped in that regard. And even though more Republicans and Democrats in the Congress support Ukraine, the current power structure there they're able to stop this from happening. The Republicans clearly see our border problems in the U.S. as a very, very good topic for them, or issue for them, in the presidential campaign. So they're going to use this, even though they've made it clear in recent weeks that they're not actually interested in solving it. They want to have it as an issue for the next 10 months. On the other hand, the president has got to do a better job. The president has not done a good job, nor has his National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, or the rest of the administration. They have not done a good job of explaining to Americans why this is to our advantage, why it's in our interest. Instead, they allow others to control the narrative that this is how we're wasting money. Why do we care about some faraway border dispute instead of we have our own border problems? And it's shameful, but the burden is on the president to do a much better job than he's doing to make the case why this is important. I don't know if it gets fixed. It should. Again, most Republicans support Ukraine in the Congress. And I hope that we can eventually get this fixed. But I mean, you probably saw they just now it looks like they're going to pass another 6-week extension to keep the government running. So right now they're having a hard time even keeping the government running, let alone dealing with important strategic issues.
Yeah, it's absolutely a depressing situation for the moment. So I'm wondering, Andriy, how is Ukraine preparing for a possible scenario where, at least in the short term, there could be an ongoing problem of military assistance, but in the longer term, for example, if Donald Trump or someone like him comes to the White House, is Ukraine already preparing for this scenario? If so, how? And do you see in any way that Europe and other allies are ready to, at least to some degree, step in and fill the gaps?
It's a difficult question because of course we are discussing this, and there are like certain thoughts about what we can do about that. But I am, of course, like with Trump, there are like voices in the U.S. which are saying that, well, first of all, the assistance will be unblocked this year, and then some people say, well, even if Trump becomes a president, Trump was the president who actually appointed government first time, who was quite pro-Ukrainian. But then there are other experts which are saying from Washington D.C. who are saying, well, this time he will be very different and he will be much more radical than he used to be. It's extremely unclear scenario, and we don't know, of course, what can be done. So yes, we do talk to other countries, and we discuss this with the countries which have a capacity to help. So, for example, there are certain countries which are having financial resources, so we can buy weapons. There are some countries which have weapons, but they cannot sell them to Ukraine. So perhaps we can combine these together and do something like which we did with certain models of the weapons last year, when some countries were paying and the other countries were supplying. There are countries which are still stating an unwavering support, such as UK, and providing additional weapons and thinking about the new technologies and so on. But I can tell you, if the President of the United States, I'm not saying the name, but if the President of the United States uses executive power to stop the aid to Ukraine completely, it will be extremely difficult. It will be. There's absolutely no way anyone in the world can replace that capacity, especially like in a more or less short period of time. So in a long period of time, yes, it's potentially can be replaced, but not in a short period of time. We're talking about F-16s. F-16s need to be not just supplied, but they also need to be maintained. They need to be supported. They need to be trained. Like there should be training and so on and so on. It obviously boils down to United States and so on. So we're talking about Patriot missiles, which are made in the United States. We're talking about some other types of weapons. We're talking about the weapons, basic weapons such as M777 howitzers, barrels for which are made just in one place in the United States, in New York, in state of New York. So yeah, we're talking about some serious bottlenecks in this case. And let's not downplay that by saying that, yeah, other countries should step in and that things will be fine. Things will not be fine, unfortunately.
I wasn't trying to
Yeah,
downplay it,
no,
but everybody needs to prepare for the worst case scenario, which we obviously hope doesn't happen. But you touched on the F-16s. I mean, maybe you could just give us an update, because there's been training going on. But when will Ukraine actually be able to take to the skies? That would be my first question. And then secondly, Ukraine has been developing its own defense industry quite rapidly. Can you give us a sort of take on in sort of which sectors, if that's the right word, where is the main focus on, and how successful is Ukraine being with cooperating with European and other defense corporations in joint projects in this respect?
Right. Yeah. So first question about F-16s, that would be my first question too. I would love to know when F-16s are coming to Ukraine. And of course, we don't know yet. And there's been discussions, there's been training ongoing happening, and there are talks about the first quarter, first half of the year, but there is no precise information at this time, at least in our knowledge. And they need to come as soon as, but we always knew that. So there's already been a lot of progress with the training. There's a lot of progress with selection, the models. The most critical thing, I would say, is that the only more critical thing than timing is actually the technical specification of the planes, because they need to be competitive. They need to be able to set up at least sectoral air superiority, at least in some sort of operational zones. So they need to be better than Russians, and that, which means that they shouldn't be coming in the older specifications. They need to be updated and modernized, and that's the question which we still are not sure exactly what specs are coming. So I'm more concerned with that, because again, timing is a timing, but they will come. I mean, there's already like governmental programs for them to come. Question is at which spec they're going to come. Okay, so regarding the industrial, yes, there is of course understanding that the mass matters, so that there's no question about that. Timing of the war obviously is longer than many people predicted. And Russia is ramping up its industrial base, and they're mobilizing the industry. They invest a lot of money into the industry. They're compensating their basically slowdown of the industry in general because of the sanctions and because of the isolation through investment of the to the military sector. But we do know that most of what they do is actually older equipment. Is more like old school equipment. They still invest in the modern ones, such as EW, electronic warfare, and also the drones. But we do understand that we need to ramp up our production, but at the same time we need to be different than Russians. We should not be like looking at basically catching up with Russians, because that's not a very good game. By the way, if I may, I've written an article about that in Foreign Affairs. It was published last night. So if that's fine, I can suggest that our audience looks at that. It's exactly about this question. So how we can be different from Russia in terms of the preparing for the new phase of the war. So, and how we can win it. And of course, this war is about technology. So right now, and about democratization of the technologies which are very different from what they've been in the beginning of the war. And the technological landscape of the war is changing right now. And so Ukraine needs to be in charge of that process, and we have all chances. And of course, we need some industrial collaboration, but we also need a sort of a widespread of engagement of all businesses into the industrial military industry, and that's what's currently happening. A recent quite interesting example is that there is a fund in Ukraine, and which is supported by government, who are promoting the people assembling drones at homes, because they're very simple models you can actually assemble at home. It's not a big deal. And of course, these are tactical drones, so these are very short range drones, and these are very simple drones. But these drones may help to gain the at least tactical superiority in certain areas, and which is going to be a big deal. And Russians will never do that, because Russians are not engaged in the war effort as Ukraine is. And so the discussions that Russia has twice more people, or actually 3 times more people, it's a bit irrelevant, because like most of their people are not don't want to think about the war. While in Ukraine, there's a huge majority of the population who will do everything needed in order to make Ukraine win. But indeed, the industrial is ramping up right now. Russia tries to kill it. I mean, most of the strikes right now are at least focused on the military targets, and particularly military industrial targets. They don't mind to occasionally throw the bombs at the residential buildings, as they never minded before. But at least this time, instead of the energy infrastructure, they're kind of trying to aim the military infrastructure, because they're afraid. They're afraid that Ukrainian industry is ramping up. But it's not stopping us. So it's still ramping up, and we see new models of drones showing up every day. We have like hundreds of startups of drones, and I have to say we're facing a very interesting social historical precedent because a decentralized initiative is competing with the super centralized initiative. So Russia is a super centralized. It's all authoritarian. It's all most of that is government owned, settling governments basically funded and directed. While Ukraine is extremely decentralized and is basically a startup culture. Each model has pros and cons. There's no perfect model, but we do see the competition not just of the countries, but actually the philosophies of how to ramp up innovations.
Thank you, Andriy. I just want to stay with you again a second, and I'm going to come back to you, Ben, because I want to put a couple of the questions. And the first question to you, Andriy, from Eric Brasson, who's asking about this recently signed UK-Ukrainian security agreement. Can you give us a few details about what's actually in it in terms of how is it going to help Ukraine, and maybe are you expecting other countries to follow suit? I mean, I saw that the Canadians and
Yeah.
the French perhaps are in the process.
Um,
Are we going to see like a whole stream now of these bilateral agreements, and how important are they?
Yes, and that's partly related to what you asked about the United States. So countries finally said, because when the Ramstein format, so-called Ramstein format, was set up back in April 2022, United States clearly defined its leadership, and they said, okay, we're going to be in a driver's seat of the coalition, and you guys have to help. But basically, they were like clearly taking a leadership position, which they did for the whole 2022 and the first half of 2023. And then it started to kind of slow down, and now it's blocked because of the Congress. By the way, I sent the website here, protectukrainenow.org, in the chat to everybody. This is a open source intelligence website done by the activists in the United States of America. They're calculating the US help and basically assigning it to different groups and so on, all based on the open source. So according to this website, there is still an unspent 4.2 billion US dollars of the originally committed funds. And there's still a discussion what's going to happen with them, and but nevertheless, you need to have that information because there is a strong opinion that there is still a chunk of funds which haven't been spent. I haven't done we weren't doing it myself, but I know some of these people, and they've been doing some of the diligent work. Anyway, so United Kingdom is clearly stepping up with their position, and they invite other countries to follow. They are investing in technologies, and they are, unlike some other countries, are not focusing their help on the outdated equipment and some old school stuff and basically some legacy stuff. They are actually bringing in new things. They believe that a new equipment, new technologies, if they're not battle tested in Ukraine, they are no longer relevant for the future wars, which I fully agree. And so they're bringing a lot of the new experimental technologies to Ukraine to see what works, and then they're happy to help to scale the ones which are successful, which is a very interesting approach, and it's a correct approach, particularly in the situation when we have a technological war. So and UK is happy to commit a certain amount of money, at least a minimum amount of money for the several years, in order to help Ukraine to establish a long-term sort of base and a cooperation, and at least to see the future. So it's not like months from months, kind of keeping it on a sort of short leash without understanding whether Ukraine will have the the ability. Of course, we're facing potential political change in UK as well. But what we know is that there's a strong bipartisan support to the Ukrainian case. So yeah, and we see other countries are looking at that and saying, okay, fine. So if UK is doing that, why don't we start doing? Each country has their own peculiarities. Some country may have more money than technologies. Some country may have more technologies than money. But I'm sure we can balance that. And if we build up a chain of these agreements, it will be huge. So that's what's happening now.
Thank you, Andriy. And I'm going to come back to you, Ben, because there was a question here, a very simple question asking why is President Biden and Jake Sullivan have knowingly decided not to do more for Ukraine? Why is that the case? I'll let you ask that, and then I want to ask you about Russia's strategy, how it's evolving. I mean, how sustainable is it? Because I mean, Russia obviously thinks it can wait out. It can, do another year that it's going to win in terms of time. It has more time on its hands. than Ukraine. But how sustainable is this strategy? I mean, the economy is going into a sort of melting phase very shortly.
So first to the first part of the question, I cannot explain or defend why my president, who's done such a good job on so many aspects of this, keeping 50 nations together, I'm sure that the Kremlin never envisioned this would happen. Why have we stopped short of committing to Ukrainian actually winning? And we have this ridiculous, we're with Ukraine for as long as it takes, which is a totally empty statement. And I looked at the comments from Jake Sullivan yesterday at Davos. You know, he doesn't talk anything about why it's important that Ukraine wins. It's still this it's still this indecisive incremental thinking. I can only speculate that it's number one, they have they are so worried about escalation that Russia might use a nuclear weapon. I think that's the first thing in the mind of the president. I think that's first and foremost. And of course, he has the responsibility to make sure it doesn't go there. I just think that fear is unfounded. Secondly, I think they take advice from so-called experts in Washington that have for decades invested their whole academic career into studying Russia, and that somehow Russia's this great country and too big to fail, and you know we can't allow that to happen, and oh my God, what might happen if the regime collapses? You know, what might happen? I think this is part of their thinking. I don't mean to be so harsh or dismissive, but I think that they are failing to think strategically and thinking that somehow you can negotiate with the Kremlin. And there is zero evidence in the last 300 years that Russia will live up to any agreement they've ever made. So why do we think all of a sudden that they would be reasonable, responsible negotiating partners? I think, but that's too long an answer. I'm sorry, but I think that's part of it. I imagine also the Chinese are communicating, hey, the Chinese do not see it in their interests that the Putin regime collapses, not because they love Putin or the Kremlin. They don't. They hate them, but they like cheap gas, and they don't want any disruption to the cheap gas that they get from Russia. And also, it would not be good for President Xi's regime, for the Chinese people to see that an autocratic Russian regime can be defeated. So I think there's probably some pressure coming from China, but of course that part is speculation. To the other question you asked, how long can Russia do what they're doing? Clearly, the Russians do not have the ability to knock Ukraine out of the war. They don't have the capability of forces, air, land, or sea, to break through, somehow get past Avdiivka and then drive all the way towards Kyiv as if this was 1944. They don't have it. That doesn't exist. They don't have armored forces. They don't have trained formations. The very best Russian units, the VDV and their Marines, have been destroyed 3 times over. So even though they may have the same shoulder patch in the name, it's not the same unit that was there 2 years ago. And so I think the Russians realize that their only hope is to do what you suggest, which is to wait us out. They can see that the US, Germany are still not committed to Ukraine actually winning, that we are not delivering right now. And so because they don't care about their own soldiers, they're willing to send thousands of Russian soldiers to their death every week in these meat wave attacks, to convey the impression that somehow they can do this forever. Same thing with the missiles that they're launching against Ukrainian cities and civilian targets. They're precision weapons, but they don't require precision because they don't care how many civilians are killed. And so I think the combination of missile attacks and ground attacks, those are meant to give the impression that they can do this forever. I don't think they can. I gave up trying to guess when they would run out of missiles. That's not it. But I think that the Kremlin is concerned about how long they can actually do this. There's a reason that they have not done a mobilization before this fake election on March the 17th, because then they would have to explain to the voters, if you will, why they're having to do this. And they continue to recruit troops from well away from Moscow and St. Petersburg. There's no funerals happening in Moscow and St. Petersburg. All the funerals are happening way out in the countryside, or they don't even send the bodies back, because if they send the bodies back, then they would have to pay the families, whatever the Russian government's obligation is. So I think that there is if we were smarter and more aggressive in the combination of sanctions and information operations, we would find that there actually is a very fragile Russian population support for what's going on right now.
Thank you, Ben. We're running out of time, so I want to put this last couple of questions here to you, Andriy. First of all, is the EU likely to fail in meeting its target of 1 million shells to Ukraine by April? Perhaps that's an obvious answer, but I'll let you reply to that anyway. And then the second question is related to sanctions. I mean, what do you think would be the most helpful measure to widen further sanctions? I mean, what's missing? What more could be done in let's say we've had the 12th sanctions package. What should go into the next package? Or what more can be done to make the ones that are already there more impactful?
I will answer, but I remember Ben answering the same questions in the different other conferences. So if I may ask you that he helps me, because he knows quite a bit about that. On the sanctions, I don't know if nobody knows if this will be met, but I've heard many opinions that it won't be, but we'll see. So far, the most of the regarding the 1 million of the shells, the expert opinions were different, and I'm sure that expert opinions were rather negative, but there's still some time, and we'll see to that. I'm sure Ben knows it well. Regarding the sanctions, I can point you out one thing. Let's clearly see that there are certain countries which are trading with the West, and at the same time they're trading with Russia. There are certain countries which are member of NATO, such as Turkey, for example, trading with Russia easily on many different items. There are certain countries which are dependent on international help and actively working with the international community, still trading. So I think that is it possible to stop trading with Russia, particularly on some items? Yes, absolutely. There is oil sent to Europe right now as we speak from Russia to European Union. There are some shipments where even to United States. There was one, I would say, ridiculous case when the shipment of U.S. oil was to U.S. Navy base. But Europe receives Russian oil all the time. There is a Black Sea monitoring group which you can all Google, and they do every day. They monitor the shipments from the Black Sea of Russian oil and other commodities, including grains and so on. So you can see what kind of billions we're talking about. And there's many countries which have no problem with this, and these countries are either part of Western community or active trader with the Western community. So I think that stopping that is also not that difficult. We could have stopped, I don't know, money laundering, for example. We could have stopped terrorist money in the Western banks. So why cannot we stop Russian oil in Western banks, and why cannot we stop Russian oil in Western commodity systems? That could be easily done. Again, it's a question of choice. I don't think there is enough political will to do that. I think there's been still a discussion of the possible off-ramp negotiations, etc., etc. And then there is a serious lobbying of the Western businesses to not do that, because they were hoping that things will eventually get back to normal. A war will not take long, and basically things will be restored. And I think that politicians need to understand that this is killing the global security architecture. That sort of dual standards. So it's a political choice. It's not a technical matter. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll give the floor back to you, Ben.
Well, it's hard to improve on what Andriy just said, and for sure, there are American companies as well as companies from across Europe that are still doing business with Russia. There's no doubt about it. I think I have changed my thinking on sanctions here over the last couple of years. I remember 2 years ago, Vice President Harris saying that there would be sanctions like we have never seen before that would be put against Russia. And actually they have, but there is a limited utility to sanctions. Sanctions need to be a part of, that using our economic power as part of trying to hold Russia accountable, China, et cetera. But I think I'm not cynical about it, but I think I'm probably more clear-eyed about what to expect. And as usually what happens, whether it's sanctions on Iran or Russia or others, it's the bottom 90% of the population that pays the price. Because the oligarchs, they'll usually be able to avoid feeling the real pain, even if they can't go get their yacht that's impounded in Italy, or they can't take their holiday to the Adriatic anymore. But I think going after their money, the top 100 richest people in Russia, going after their money, going and making sure their kids are not going to school in London or Geneva or something like that, they should feel the pain, because then I think then they will be putting pressure on the Kremlin to like, hey, you're wrecking my life. I can't go see my mistress, in Madrid anymore. And so I think this is important. I will say, and I get this from my Ukrainian army friends, that they can see a difference in the quality of what Russia has now, that they no longer have the same quality of weapons, particularly precision weapons and ammunition, because sanctions have helped, that Russia no longer has access to European companies and American companies that used to provide components for them. So that's an important part of the sanctions process. EU will not deliver 1 million rounds. And they started too late. They're making progress, but it started too late. Hopefully next year we'll be there.
It seems to me that we're always too late. I don't want to finish on a negative word, but we ran out of time. But I have to say, I personally feel very exasperated and disappointed by the lack of expediency in terms of doing the slogan everybody talks about, standing with Ukraine and doing what Ukraine needs for as long as it takes, because we are seeing this only in words, not in actions. I mean, I believe Ukraine can defeat Russia, can win this war. But as you mentioned, both of you, we need to see the political will. We need to see urgent steps taken, and they need to be taken now. Because the alternative is I don't want to think about the alternative, but the alternative is actually waiting around the corner, and it's getting closer and closer as we are sitting here. Time is not on our side, and Russia is using this situation to their own advantage. So with that, I need to close this meeting. Thank both of you very much for coming and sharing your excellent insights. It's always a pleasure to have both of you here. I hope to see you again in the future at another EPC event. EPC will continue to follow developments in Ukraine very closely on many different issues. So until the next time, I wish everybody a great afternoon. Slava Ukraine.
Yeah, Heroям Slava. Thank you very much. Thank you.